Alan Ford is with me today. He's a professor of theology here, and he's an expert on the Irish Reformation. Irish Reformation. Why can we talk about writing the Irish Reformation? Did it happen?
Arguably, it never happened. A very short lecture. Yes, of course, the Irish Reformation failed, and that's the fascinating aspect of the Irish Reformation, because it was, if you like, always about to happen, not quite happened. Something that was going to happen in the future. And when you look at Irish Protestant attitudes, you can see right from the beginning of the Reformation in Ireland a hope, an eschatological hope sometimes, that the Reformation in Ireland would succeed if only they got their strategy and their policy right.
Okay, well, you say it was almost about to happen. Why do you think it was only an almost?
Well, the Reformation in Ireland, why it failed, is a quite significant historical debate which grew up in the 1980s, stimulated by...
Oh, actually, he was there before. I remember going to a lecture on this as an undergraduate in the 1970s.
That far ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Nicholas Canny and Brendan Bradshaw, Stephen Ellis, a whole series of Irish historians got involved in this, and they tried to identify when, if you like, you could say the Irish Reformation had definitively failed. And of course they came up, as historians often do when they argue, with a whole range of answers, ranging from the Irish Reformation having failed by the 1560s, Brendan Bradshaw's argument, to the Irish Reformation not having failed till the 19th century, Nicholas Canny's rather off-the-cuff suggestion, to the suggestion of, I think, most historians that in fact the crucial period was the 1590s, when Protestantism and Catholicism in Ireland really got to grips with each other. The basic problem is what you have is, initially in Ireland you have a political reformation, a reformation imposed by the English king because he wanted a divorce from his wife. He was therefore separated from the papacy. That official reformation in Ireland began with legislation in 1536, which created the Church of Ireland as a separate non-papal church. That church didn't really gain much adherence in Ireland because the power of the king in Ireland was limited to the Pale and the areas around it. It wasn't until the power of the English king expanded to the whole of Ireland by the end of the 16th century that you can really begin to speak of the Church of Ireland being a national church. And by then it had a whole series of problems. It was a church associated with the English, with the English monarch. And of course the brutal behaviour of the English monarchy in the 16th century in Ireland, the way they suppressed rebellions, imposed martial law and killed and executed people, created a whole series of Catholic martyrs, and of course martyrdom is the lifeblood of a church. So the Catholic Church, if anything, grew in strength as a result of the English state's activities in Ireland. It was also, the Church of Ireland was also English in a cultural sense. It spoke English, its clergy, many of them were from England, educated in England, and it was associated, if you like, with Anglicisation. And of course, the whole purpose of the Reformation across Europe was to be a vernacular Reformation, was no longer to preach to people in a foreign language, to read the Bible in Latin, to do the liturgy in Latin, but to do it in the people's own language. And in Ireland you had the rather perverse concept of a Reformation, which was preaching to the people in a foreign language, which I think created obvious problems. The third element, if you like, in the problem faced by the Reformation in Ireland was the fact that the Protestant education in Ireland never really got off the ground. A lot of the power of the Reformation was about education, controlling the education system. And the state in 16th century Ireland didn't do that. Many of the schools remained in Catholic hands, and by the end of the 16th century the Catholic Church had created an educational structure which went from Ireland to the continent, to the seminaries in the Spanish Netherlands, in Spain, the Irish colleges as they became called, which created a Catholic educational network that provided a firm grounding, intellectual grounding for Irish Catholics, which Irish Protestants found very difficult to challenge.
And also, there was just the march of time. In the 1630s, the group that weren't accepting the Reformation theology were a rather disparate group. By the 1690s, when it's spreading outside the Pale in Ireland, the Catholic Church has a very clear self-embattled identity, and the Counter-Reformation. So these guys coming back from the Irish colleges, they weren't just like people in the 15th century who had gone to study on the continent. They're coming back as people who actually see themselves as going into the trenches.
You have two parallel reformations going on in Ireland, one successful, one unsuccessful. The unsuccessful one is the Protestant Reformation, the successful one is the Catholic Reformation. And you're absolutely right, the continentally educated students, when they come back as priests, have a major role in spreading the Counter-Reformation, in changing Irish Catholicism, which was a very medieval institution with an intense loyalty from the people, but perhaps not very intellectually sophisticated or aware of Tridentine norms. And you have in Irish Catholicism throughout the late 16th and 17th and 18th centuries a process of the normalisation of Irish Catholicism, creating this Irish Catholic Church. And one of the reasons why Nicholas Canny suggested that maybe the Catholic Reformation didn't finally succeed until the 19th century was that he pointed out it wasn't till Cardinal Cullen and his establishing of a militant Irish Catholic Church in the middle of the 19th century that you can truly speak of a reformed Irish Catholic Church based on the loyalty of the Irish people and a clear intellectual purpose.
And of course that isn't even the Tridentine, that is the post-French Revolutionary Catholic image.
The interesting thing about that is, of course, that the Reformation, which had failed in the 17th and 18th centuries, is revivified in the early 19th century. And we have, on behalf of some Irish evangelical clergy in the 1820s, what's called the Second Reformation. And this is that fascinating sense of Irish Protestants that if only they can get the message right, that Ireland could still convert to Protestantism. It seems to us, in retrospect, a bizarre idea, but there was extraordinary vigour and resource poured into the Second Reformation in Ireland in the 1820s and 1830s and 1840s, excesses such as superism is the obvious one, where the Irish Protestant evangelicals in particular thought that if you preached the Word of God to Irish Catholics, if you gave them the Bible in Irish or in English, they would see the truth.
Well, it's interesting to look at this map that's on the screen right now. This was produced by the Church Missionary Society in London. And if you look at Ireland, Ireland has got one or two missions on it. So there in the 1860s, there's a group who look on Ireland as mission territory.
Absolutely. This was English evangelicals saw Ireland as a huge opportunity. This was a country overwhelmed with popish darkness, in the phrase of the time, which if only they gave sufficient resource to and sent in enough evangelical preachers, they could turn this round. And it wasn't really until the end of the 19th century when the religious censuses began to produce the numbers that people realised that the hope of converting Irish Catholics was never going to happen.
You mentioned at the beginning the debate in the 70s between Nicholas Canny and Brendan Bradshaw, and we could have added in umpteen other names, James Maguire, Margaret McCurtain, that great generation of Irish historians. Where has the historiography taken it now?
I think there's a general recognition that the possible way in which to look at it is through confessionalisation. What you have is, in Ireland from the late 16th century onwards, the progressive creation of two different denominations, two different confessional churches, each with their own distinctive theological, intellectual, political identity, their ethnic and cultural allegiances, and that by the beginning of the 17th century, we have two firmly different religious cultures in Ireland, a minority Protestant culture that is basically Anglicising, which has its strength in Ulster thanks to the plantation and the importation of Scottish and English settlers, and an Irish Catholic church, which is organised on a Tridentine basis with a resident episcopate that has the allegiance firm and unchanging of the majority of the Irish people.
Alan, thank you very much.